Alright, so we'll say good morning. Today's daf is daf Vav. We are picking up at the two dafs on daf Hey Amud Beis. A lot to do today. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. 5b. So we'll say our shir today is sponsored by Milt and Melanie Gertner in honor of a birth of a grandson. Baruch Hashem to their children, Craig and Miri Gertner of Detroit, Michigan, and big brothers Ruvain and Zev. I understand it's going to be a Tanis Esther Bris in Mir Hashem. Should be Zocha Lachniso Beviso Shel Avram Avinu Bizmano Legadlo LeTorah LeChuppah Ulemaasim Tovim. And also to thank the Daf Yomi is sponsored by the Haber family in commemoration of the yard site on the 6th of Adar of Mrs. Haber's mother, Chava Bas Mordechai. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an Aliyah. So I'll say, so with that, let's begin. So again, Daf Vav is today's. So we're picking up from Hamud Beis, 9 lines up from the bottom. Amar Shmuel. So we'll say a couple of very interesting cases. Amar Shmuel. Kiddushin, Nasan la Kasef Shava Kasef. So remember again, we'll say, let's say in the following case of Kiddushin, a man is giving a woman Kasef or Shava Kasef. Money, or I should say monetary equivalent. V'amarla, Hari at mikudeshes, Hari at miureses, Hari at li leintu. Man says to her, you are mikudeshes to me, you are miureses to me, you are to me a wife. Hare zu mikudeshes. She is mikudeshes. All of these wordings work. Hareini isheich. But if he says, you are my wife, I am your husband. Hareini ba'aleich, I am your baal. Hareini aruseich, I am your arusa. Ein kan beis michush. So we'll say these wordings are absolutely irrelevant. Ein kan beis michush, Rashi says, ein kan afilu safek kiddushin. So we're going to see again these type of wordings where the husband is saying, I am your husband, I am your aruseich, I am your ba'aleich. So these wordings are absolutely meaningless and do not affect Kiddushin at all. V'chein begerushin. And the same applies ultimately with divorce. Nasan la, if he gave her a get, v'amar la, hari at mushlachas, hari at migureshes, hari at mutaris nechal adam. If he says to her, you are sent away, you are migureshes, you are divorced, you are permitted to every man, harezu migureshes, then ultimately, this is proper wording for affecting divorce. Any isheich, any ba'aleich, any aruseich, if he says, I am no longer your husband, I am no longer your baal, I am no longer your arusa, in kan beis michush. This verbiage, these wordings are absolutely meaningless. Amar le'rat papa la'abaye, le'memra, Disavar Shmuel Yadayim Shein Mochichos Habyan Yadayim. So both say, is this to say that according to Shmuel, Yadayim Me Mochichos. So both say, remember what we've had this many times. Yadayim Shein Mochichos means partial ambiguous statements. Partial ambiguous statements. So is this to say that partial ambiguous statements are ultimately again Habyan Yadayim are proper statements. So again, I will say what Rav Papa is inferring over here is that Lamaisa again these statements of Hariat Mikudeshes. Interestingly enough, what Shmuel does not have in these phrases is what? Is one word, li. It just says you are betrothed, but it doesn't say to me. So this says, Rav Papa, seems to be a partial statement. So is it true that then Shmuel holds that partial statements are effective? Is that true? V'hatna, but we learned, ha'omer ahei. If a person says, I will be harez and nazir, this is effectively a kabbalas nazirus, an acceptance of a Nazirite vow. V'hadinan baba. The Gemara asks, how do we know that? V'dilma ahei betanis. Maybe he's saying, I want to fast. V'amar Shmuel, v'hushaya nazir over lefanav. And Shmuel said, the case over here, both say where he says, I will be, and he becomes a nazir is what? Is a case where there was a nazir passing in front of him. Taima din nazir over lefanav. The reason why he becomes a nazir is because there's a nazir passing in front of him. Ha lav hachi. But if the nazir were not passing in front of him, lo, then ultimately again he would not become a nazir. So we'll say, what do you see from there? You see from there that yadayim shein mochichos lahavi yadayim, that partial statements, partial ambiguous statements are in fact not effective. Therefore, using that logic, when a man says to a woman, hariat mikudeshas, but doesn't put in their li, then perhaps I should make the argument that such a statement is not effective for Kiddushin. To which the Gemara says, what's the case? The cases where he said, Hari at mikudeshes li. He's saying, you are betrothed to me. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so if that's the case that a man says, Hari at mikudeshes li, you are betrothed to me, so then what's the chiddush? Then why does the Brisa, why does Shmuel feel the need to go ahead and tell me that this is an effective way to mekadesh a woman? To which the Gemara says, so my kamashlan, hani, top of vav, hani lishni basrai kamashlan. Both say, because the truth is, Shmuel is just bringing these earlier lishonos, Hari at mikudeshes li, Hari at mu'ureses li. Those are the obvious ones. The real chiddush that Shmuel is teaching me, Rabosai, are the last three. Hareini aruseich, hareini isheich, hareini ba'alech, hareini aruseich. I am your husband, I am your Baal, I am your Orus. So again, Shmuel said that these statements are meaningless. Why are these statements meaningless? Because we'll say this is very interesting. The Torah, when speaking about marriage, says ki yikach ish isha, when a man shall take a woman. In other words, we'll say that the formulation for effecting Kiddushin is only good when the husband takes the woman onto himself. But if he takes himself onto her, so to speak, then what? Then such a lashon is not effective for Kiddush. Now, what does it mean practically? So if he says, Hari'at mikudeshes li, he's taking her to him, that's effective. But if he says, Hareini ba'aruseich, I am your arusa, giving himself over to her, again, it's just a biblical technicality, it does not work. Similarly, v'hacha ksiv, by Gerushin it says, v'shulcha v'lo shishlach hasatzmo. Furthermore, by divorce it says, he will send her away, but not that he will send himself away. So therefore, again, if he uses the lashon of hari'at mushleches, hari'at migureshes, hari'at mutaris choladam, you are sent away, you are migureshes, you are mutaris everyone, that's fine. But if he says, I am no longer your husband, I am no longer your arusa, I am no longer your Baal, he is sending himself away, so to speak, from the marital union, such a declaration does not work. Says the Gemara Tana Rabbanon, hari'at ishti, hari'at arusasi, hari'at kinuyali. So we'll say, so now the Brisa goes through some more Lashonos. The husband says to his wife, you are my wife, you are my arusa, you are acquired to me. Or he says, or mikudeshes. We'll say all of these phrases work to affect Kiddushin. However, let's say he says, hari'at shali. Let's say he makes a final statement, you are mine. Hari'at birshusi, you are in my rishus, meaning you're in my domain. Hari'at zikukali, you are tethered to me. Mikudeshes. Then the Maisa again says the Braisa, these phrases, this verbiage works as well to affect Kiddushin. Says, I don't understand. Why did you break up these two things into two sets of three? Why don't you just list all of them as one contiguous list of 6? To which the Gemara says, Tana tlas shaminu. To which the Gemara says, because they both say, this is how the Tana heard them. The Tana who's relating this in the Gemara heard these as 2 separate statements of 3. So therefore, again, how he heard it is ultimately how he's relating it. I'll say, it's an interesting muster. Sometimes we try to find deeper meanings in things, and sometimes things just are what they are. The Gemara says, why did you say it like this? Why 2 groups of 3 instead of 1 group of 6? That's how he heard it. He heard it in 2 groups of 3. That's how he's relaying it. An interesting idea. So the Gemara goes weiter. So listen to this. Now the Gemara is going to ask about some other types of verbiage, some other types of lashonos. Are they effective or not for the creation of Kiddushin? Say, miyuchedes li mahu. What happens if he says to her, you are miyuchad, you are singled out from me? Miyuedes. Abba says, miyuedes literally means like, you are known to me. Mahu. Ezrasi, you are my helpmate. Negdasi, you are opposite me. Atsurasi, literally again, you are gathered to me. Mahu. Salasi, you are my rib. Mahu. Sigurasi, you are closed beneath me. Mahu. Tachtai, you are under me. Mahu. And if you notice, by the way, these are all Lashonos that play on the pasuk of Adam and Chava. Right? He calls her a rib, right? Because the Yibam Shalom created Chava from a rib of Adam. Right? Torah says that Kadosh Baruch Hu closed off Adam's side after he took the rib. So again, if a person uses these type of Lashonos, which again, are not obvious Lashonos. It's not really clear what exactly he means, but again, it's a little bit of a play on the biblical episode of Adam and Chava. Do these Lashonos work? Likuchasi, you are taken by me. Mahu, what's the halacha? So we'll say, so what's the status if a man used any of these Lashonos to affect Kiddushin? Does it work or not? So the Gemara says, I'm not sure about a lot of these, but Pashut miachad, I can answer one of them. This sanya, because we learned, ha'omer lekuchasi harezim mikudeshes. If a man said to a woman, you are taken unto me, it is mikudeshes, she works. Why? Mishum shenemar, ki yikach ish es ki yikach ish isha. Also, I'll say, so again, at least one of the cases we can answer why. Because if a man uses lashon of lekuchasi, you are taken unto me, there we assume he's mamish using the biblical lashon of marriage. Ki yikach ish isha, when a man will take a woman, and therefore again, she is in fact mikudeshes. Iboilu, to which the Gemara asks another kasha. Charufasi mahu. We'll say, what happens if he used lashon of charufasi? Now, remember, we know that wording of shifcha necharefes leish, which is talking about, again, a maidservant who is designated to marry a particular man. So the way the Torah uses charufa is designation. Designation. So what happens if he says, this is the money and you are my charufasi, you are my charufa? Does that work or not? Tashma, Tisanyo ha'omer charufasi mikudeshes. The Brisa says, if a man says to a woman, you are my charufa, literally, you are designated to me, then it works. It works. She's mikudeshes. Why? Shekein beYehuda koren la'arusa charufa. Because in the tribal area of Yehuda, they used to call an arusa a charufa. So the Gemara says, Yehuda havi ruba da'ama. So who cares? Right? So what? Yehuda is now the whole world, right? So meaning, the Gemara says, what a strange thing to say. So that's fine, meaning I understand if I'm in Yehuda and I use that lashon. What if I'm not in Yehuda? What if I'm somewhere else? So just because in Yehuda, they go ahead and they say that what? They say that charufa means arusa, so that should work for the rest of the world. To which the Gemara says, Hachikama, this is what it means to say. Ha'omer charufasi mikudeshes. If a man says to a woman, you are my charufa, she is mikudeshes, shene'emar, ve'ishivcha necharefes leish. Because the pasuk uses that lashon rabosai by a maidservant who was designated for a particular man. Va'od, and furthermore, beYehuda korin le'arusa ve'charufa. In Yehuda they call an arusa charufa. The Gemara says, 1 second, the Yehuda va'od lekras. So we'll say, you understand that read? The Gemara said, if a man says charufasi to a woman, that's proper Kiddushin. Why? Because the Torah uses that lashon when speaking about designation of a maidservant, and furthermore, in Yehuda they also call a charufa and arusa. So I don't understand. If you're basing it on a pasuk, then what? Then who cares what they do in Yehuda? It's almost like you're bringing up the practices of Yehuda to back up a pasuk. If you have a pasuk, Allah Chikar, this is what it means to say, Ha'omer charufa beYehuda mikudeshes. If a man uses the lashon of charufa, when in Yehuda, it works. Why? Shekein beYehuda, koren la'arusa charufa. Because in Yehuda, they call the arusa a charufa. So we'll say, so therefore again, halacha l'maisa, what the Gemara essentially says, and this is actually very important, is that there are two essentially categories of lashonos with which you could affect Kiddushin. There are general lashonos that are global in nature. They could be used anywhere because, again, they have a global understanding. Then there are what we'll call regional lashonos. Regional lashonos are based on the way that people speak in different locales. Therefore, again, if you have certain expressions used in certain places, then they will be able to affect Kiddushin in those particular places. So, for example, in a place like Yehuda, where they use the lashon of charufa to mean Kiddushin, then it'll work. But what do we infer from this? If, let's say, outside of Yehuda, in the Galil, if you used charufa, then it sounds like what? Sounds like, again, it does not affect Kiddushin. It's just an important idea. But my asking him, so we'll say, so the Gemara goes back for just a moment. But my asking him, look at Rashi. Rashi says, Bahanach lishni dekami bailan, ihavu Kiddushin olo, heichi domi. So let's remember again, the Gemara raised a whole bunch of questions, right? If a man uses a lashon of like miyuchedes, miyuedes, ezrasi, negdasi, atsurasi, tzalasi, sigurasi, tachtai, tifusasi. Good morning, Mr. Schoenfeld. So what? I'm sorry. You have to have more faith in your father. He can handle it. So we'll say. So now the Gemara asks the following. So the Gemara says again, with all of those lashonos that we asked about before, all of those different lashonos, right? So I'm asking on what's the case. Remember, we'll say in all of those cases, these are a little bit of like nondescript phrases that we're not exactly sure what they mean. Do they mean Kiddushin or something else? What's the context? So we'll say, so the Gemara asks the following. Let's take one example. A man says to a woman, A man says to a woman, let us borrow one from here. Hariat salasi. You are my rib. You are my rib. Right? It's a great line. Right? You are my rib. So we'll say, so the shaila is, so like, what's the context in which that statement is being said? Because we'll say, again, remember, context means everything. So if you're talking about over here, if, we'll say, actually, the Ritva removes Gita from over here. So let's just go with Kiddushin. So if they're talking about marriage, if they're not talking about marriage, then Mina Yada Mai Kamala. So we'll say, so if this man and woman are not talking about marriage, and he says to her, you are like my rib, so she's going to say, I don't know if I should slap you or say thank you, right? I don't know what that means. That statement ultimately, again, is a meaningless statement. Ve'ela b'medaber, my prime rib, right? Ve'ela b'medaber ima al iskegita. Right? He's telling her, I'm hungry, right? So ve'ela b'medaber ima al iskegita v'kiddusha. So we'll say, so it must be that what? It must be that the case that we're dealing with over here is that they're already discussing marriage. They must be discussing marriage, and therefore, again, afagav delo amar la nami. So we'll say, that here's the difference. If they're already discussing marriage, then here's the interesting part. He doesn't have to say anything explicit at all. Why? How do we know that? Now listen to this. If a man was discussing with a woman about matters of divorce or matters of marriage, and the Rasul said, listen to this case. Let's leave out the get for just a moment. Let's say a man and woman are talking about, they're not yet, there's no Kiddushin yet, but they're talking about what are good wedding dates. What caterer should we use? Or what hall should we rent? And then in the middle of this discussion, he doesn't say anything, but he gives her kesef kiddushin. He gives her money. So we'll say, so now, there's a conversation happening about marriage. He's given her money in the midst of that conversation, but yet what? What's missing? There's no declarative statement of Hariat Mikudeshes Li B'ma'ozu with this money. So what's the status of that conveyance? Rabbi Yossi Omer Dayo. Rabbi Yossi says it's good, meaning you don't need an explicit statement. Why not? Because context. Because since you're talking about marriage and he gives you money in the midst of this conversation, the context of the conversation tells me that it's Kesef Kiddushin. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Tzarech lefarish. Rabbi Yehuda says not true. You have to explicitly state ultimately what it is that you're talking about. In other words, it's not just enough to rely on context, but rather, again, he must explicitly say, Hare at mikudeshes li b'ma'ozu, that you are mikudeshes to me with this money. And if we're saying Shmuel, we'll say that's what? The halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. And this is the halacha l'maisa what? If they're talking about marriage, if they're talking about in Yom of marriage, and he hands her money and does not make a declarative statement, that in fact works. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi, going back for just a moment, so if they're talking about marriage, and he says something like, you're my rib, so of course they're mikudeshes. Why? How do we know that? Because even if he didn't say anything, and he gave her money, she would be mikudeshes. So the Gemara says, Amri, so therefore the case must be that they're talking about marriage. So listen to this. So we'll say, here's a fascinating musar. So if they're talking about marriage, and he didn't make any declarative statement, but just handed her money, everyone would agree that's what? That she's mikudesh, the Kiddushin works. But here we'll say the problem is what? He gives her, they're talking about marriage, he gives her the money, and he makes a statement like, you're my rib. You're my rib. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so the shaila is that what? The shaila is, what's the nature of this statement? Is he ultimately affecting marriage? Or is he saying that ultimately, again, I'd like you to come work for me? In other words, we'll say, what the Gemara is saying over here is, I know that this lashon means some type of connection. I just don't know the connection. So we'll say, there's an incredible musar. The incredible musar is, sometimes when you say too much, you actually create incredible ambiguity. Sometimes the less said, the more is understood. So here's a perfect example. They're in the midst of talking about marriage. If he says nothing and gives her kesef kiddushin, then what? We pass like Rabbi Yossi, that's what Rabbi Yossi. That's what? She's mikudesh. That's why? Because the context clarifies for us the conveyance of the money. It's understood that it's kesef kiddushin. The problem is, even if there's context, they're talking about marriage, but he throws in one of these lashonos that we're not sure exactly what it means. I don't know what it means. You're my rib. Or you are, or we took, or you're under me. You're taking. So what does that mean? What is he saying to her? I'd like to acquire your maaseh adayim now. I'd like to acquire your earnings now. I'd like you to come work for me, or is it marriage? That's the ambiguity. To which the Gemara says teku. So we'll say. So the truth is again the way Paskin halacha l'maisa is the following. So halacha l'maisa, if they're talking about marriage and he says nothing, he doesn't say a declarative statement, but gives her money. Halacha l'maisa, she is mikudeshes, because the context of the conveyance clarifies the nature of the conveyance. If, however, he says one of these ambiguous lashonos, then in fact it'll be safek mikudeshes. Then we're not exactly sure what to do with her in that situation. I will say safek mikudeshes is a serious state, because essentially she has the chumras, the stringencies of being married and being unmarried as well. Gufa. So we'll say now the Gemara goes and restates the machlokes he had before. If a man is talking with a woman about matters of divorce or matters of Kiddushin, I just want to point out something very interesting. This is not a primary topic, but it's important. If you notice, get is being thrown in here. So I know what you're thinking to yourself. I know exactly what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking better than you know what you're thinking, right? Which is what? What you're thinking to yourself is, one second, why does get need any declarative statement, right? Right, good. Right, why does Gideon? So the Kiddushin I know needs a declarative statement because Kiddushin needs expression of das. Why does get Shabbos? Remember again, get does require. The Gemara discussed this. Get does require declarative statement because we have to know that the husband understands what it is that he's conveying, and if the husband is giving this with full das. That's why get is mixed into all of this as well, even though it's not our primary topic. So Shabbos says now the Gemara is going to restate the machlokes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Huda. What's the case? A man was talking with a woman. Let's just go with Kiddushin. A man was talking with a woman about matters of marriage, talking about the wedding date, right? The hall, the caterer, and he gives her kesef Kiddushin, but doesn't make a declarative statement of Hari'at Mikudeshes Li. Rabbi Yossi says, it works. It works. Context clarifies conveyance. Rabbi Huda Omer, Sarach Lafarish. Rabbi Huda says, no, you have to explicitly articulate the nature of the conveyance. So first of all, Rabbi Huda said in Mishmul, this only works when Rabbi Yossi says that the context clarifies the conveyance and he doesn't have to make a declarative statement. That's of course only assuming that they're already talking about marriage. So to Rabbi Roshia, that it only works if what? If they're mamish talking about marriage. So the Gemara says Kitana. In reality, this is a machlokes Tanaim. Rabbi Omer v'hu shasukin ba'osa inyan. Rabbi says that Rabbi say, when does Rabbi Yossi hold that if you just give over the money without an explicit statement that it affects Kiddushin? That's only if they were already talking about marriage. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon Omer afa pi she'in asukin ba'osa inyan. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon says that even if they're not talking about that particular matter. But one second, how does that make sense? If they're not talking about marriage, so let's imagine this following scene. They're not talking about marriage. And he goes ahead and he just gives her money, either with no statement or with one of these previously stated ambiguous statements. How in the world is she supposed to know what this money is for? Amrabaye me'inyan le'inyan ba'ose inyan. So to which Abaye says, what's the case over here? Look at Rashi. It's actually right across in Rashi. Me'inyan le'inyan shepasku miladaber bekiddushin mamish. They stopped talking about actual kiddushin. Vayamudabrim bidvar macherim. Umiu ladavar tzarchi zivugam haya kimo kama yesh lecha nedunya v'kama salos yesh chal parnas mehem. So what happened? They stopped talking about marriage, about the plans of marriage, the plans of kiddushin, but we're still talking about what? Marriage-related discussions. How much money do you have? How many fields do you have? Right? What service for how many do you want to buy for the China? Right? All the different kinds of important questions that people deal with. Marriage-related questions. So therefore, again, they weren't discussing. So Abaye's chiddush over here is, or I should say, Abaye's chiddush over here is, even if they're not explicitly discussing Kiddushin, but they're discussing marriage-related discussions, and the money was given in that context. According to Rabbi Yossi, that'll still be effective Kiddushin. Amar Rav Huna Amar Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, and I will say that is in fact the way we pass on like Rabbi Yossi, that as long as, whether there's an explicit discussion of Kiddushin happening between the two of them, or some marriage-related discussion happening between the two of them, and money is given in the midst of that discussion, the conveyance of the Kesef Kiddushin will be appropriate. Well, that's why we don't do this today. No. Remember, there's a lot more. The Gemara says this requires eidos. This requires a lot of other things, right? So this is not. And again, remember, I want to be clear. If look, Nechemia, you could tie it much easier. Why isn't every single time that a man gives woman an engagement ring? Why isn't that not Kiddushin? So there's two reasons for it. Number one, because neither party has das that it's Kiddushin. That's number one. Number two, there's usually no eidos. So both of those things. But I'm saying if you're looking to introduce a new chumrah, I think, it's been a while since Klal Yisrael has had a new chumrah. It could very well be that a chassan gives a ring of bekavana, it's not keseg, but you don't really have to do it because contextually it's clear that Kiddushin is not being affected, especially for the reason that today we do everything under the chuppah. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna Amar Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. That Rabbi says, so this is the halacha. That technically speaking, again, if a man were to give a woman money and without an explicit declarative statement of Hari'at Mikudeshes Li, but gives it in the context either of a conversation about Kiddushin or other marriage-related topics, then in fact that conveyance would affect Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yemar Rav Ashi Ve'ala Hadam Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Lo Kol Sheni Yodei B'Tiv Gittin the Kiddushin Lo Yehelo Eisek Imayim. So we'll listen to this. We'll see this actually a little bit later on. That the Gemara discusses, whoever does not know what they're doing in matters of marriage or divorce should not get involved with it. As well as this is actually a hugely important principle. That if you don't understand the halachas concerning marriage or divorce, all the halachic intricacies, do not be a Masader Kiddushin and do not be a Masader Gittin. Why? Because they both say people who affect marriage and divorce have incredible responsibility and they are making homes, dissolving homes, and if they make mistakes, run the risk of creating a proliferation of mamzerim within Klal Yisrael. So it says the Gemara, when we say that principle later on, which we'll discuss, that whoever doesn't know what they're doing with Gittin and Kiddushin should not be involved with them, does that mean afilu lo shmir alei ha d'Rav Huna Amar Shmuel? So it says, here's what's interesting. So when we say you have to know about Kiddushin, so how much do you have to know? Do you even have to know this statement of Rav Huna in the name of Shmuel that halacha follows Rabbi Yossi? He said, yes. This is even something that you must have in your halachic base of knowledge in order to be the kind of person who's involved in Gittin and Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, V'chein begerushin, nasan la'gita v'amar l'hari at mishulech, has hard migresh, sarat mutaras l'chol adam, harehi migreshes. So let's remember, what did we say before? According from the Brisa, that by Gerushin also, if he gave her a get, and he said to her, you are sent away, you are chased away, you are muteres to every single person, she is Megureshes. The Gemara says, Pshita, is that not obvious? Pshita, it's obvious. Nasan la'gita va'amar la l'ishto, hari'at bas chorin. So if a man gave a get to his wife, and he said to her, you are free, v'avam days, lo amar v'lo klomar. Both said such a statement is meaningless. Amar la l'shivchaso, if a man said to his maid servant, hari'at mutares l'chol adam, if he said to his maid servant, you are mutares to every single person, lo amar v'lo klum. Such a statement is meaningless. So both say, see what's happening over here? He's switching the lashonos. So if he says to his wife, you are a bas chorin, you're free, such a statement is meaningless. Why? Because both say a husband doesn't own his wife. So what do you mean you're free? She was free when she was married also. She's married, but she was free. So to use that type of lashon is irrelevant. So too, if a man says to his shifcha, to his maidservant, you are mutaris to every single person, again, she was mutaris anyway beforehand. So lemaisa, again, such a statement is meaningless. Amrlo leishto, hari'at la'atzmeich mahu. What happens if a man says to his wife, literally, you are now for yourself? In other words, that you now have full rights to yourself. To yourself. You are now for yourself. Is that a proper lashon of gerushin? So So on one hand, you could say maybe he's just talking about her earnings. That now she has the right to keep her earnings. The other possibility is legamri kamarla, or maybe he's saying no. Maybe he's saying for divorce. That literally that she's divorced. To which the Gemara says Right. So the shikra. I'm sorry. So we'll say I'm sorry. Legamri kamerla. Maybe this is talking about the shifcha. So maybe he's saying ultimately. And I'm sorry. This is about the shifcha. If he said to her, "Hari atla atzmeich," you are to yourself. You belong to yourself. Ultimately, again, is he just giving the shifcha the right to her earnings, or is he actually emancipating her? Amalei Rabbeinu Ravashi. So Rabbeinu said to Ravashi, "Tashma." We learned the sanya gufo shall get shikrar. But we'll say, what is the text of a get shikrar? Hari ata ben chorin, hari ata la'atzmecha. So you are a ben chorin, right? You are free. You are to yourself. To which the Gemara says, Hashta uma eved kinani dekanili gufei ki amarle hari ata la'atzmecha legamri kamarla isha delokani gufa lokol shekin. So what is actually very interesting. To which the Gemara suggests, if a man says to his slave, hari ata la'atzmecha, you now belong to yourself. Such a lashon is a proper lashon of emancipation. So says the Gemara like this: an eved is fully owned by his master. So if for an eved, a lashon of hari atla atzmecha, you belong to yourself, is a proper lashon of shikhr, of emancipation, and allows the eved to regain autonomy to himself, then what? It should certainly work for gittin. In other words, if it's enough to go ahead and free someone who is owned by the adon, then what? Then it's certainly a powerful enough lashon to affect divorce for a woman who is not owned by her husband. So we'll say, what happens if a person says to his servant, I no longer have anything to do with you? Right? I no longer have anything to do with you. What's the status of that statement? Is that a proper statement for emancipation or not? So doesn't mean I have nothing to do with you at all. Namely, I'm emancipating you. Or maybe what it's saying is, I have no dealings with you. In other words, that for your earnings are yours, but I still own you as a slave. Let's we learn this. What's we learn this sugya? If a person sells his slave to a Gentile, the halacha is that what? The slave goes here. This is a knas, a rabbinic penalty. That if you sell this is an Eved Kanani, you sell your Eved Kanani, your non-Jewish slave, who's partially Jewish upon becoming a slave, and fully Jewish upon emancipation. But if you sell him to an idolater, to a non-Jew, to a Gentile, there's a rabbinic penalty that the slave automatically goes free, b'tzarich get shikhr me'rabba rishon. But the master, the Jewish master, must write for him a get shikhr, a document of emancipation. When is that true? That you have to write a get shikhr? Shilokasav alav ono, when you didn't write a shtar ono. Aval kasav alav ono, but if you wrote a shtar ono, zehu shechruro, this indeed is the emancipation of the Eved. So he says, heichi dami ono. By the way, what is a shtar ono? Amar Rav Sheshes, the kasav la, where he wrote to the Eved, Kishatevrach mimenu, when you run away from your master, Ainli Esek Becha, I have nothing to do with you. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that the lashon of Ainli Esek Becha, I have nothing to do with you, is what? Is a lashon of emancipation. Is a verbiage of emancipation. So we'll say, so it comes out, halacha l'maisa over here is, for an Eved as well as for an Isha, if the master or the husband were to use lashon of Ainli Esek Becha, I have nothing to do with you. For marriage purposes, that is a proper lashon of divorce. That is a lashon that means divorce. And therefore, again, if the husband gives the get and makes that declaration, that is a proper statement of divorce. And for the owner of an eved, for the owner of a slave, that is a proper lashon of emancipation as well. Amar Abai, so now we get to an interesting sugya. HaMekadesh b'milva. Listen to this. What happens if a man is mekadesh woman with a loan? I will say, now what does he mean mekadesh b'milva? Look at Rashi. HaMekadesh b'milva. Let's listen to this. Ruvain lent Rachel $1,000. Lent her $1,000. And now again he says to her, become mikudeshes to me with the loan that I gave. In other words, what does he want to do? He's going to forgive the loan. So I'm going to forgive the loan and just become mikudeshes to me with the money of the loan. So we'll say, so what's ta'alocha? Eina mikudeshes. It does not work. Now this is actually quite fascinating. Look at Rashi. Why doesn't it work? Eina mikudeshes. The kicha mistei Ephron gamrinon. Yaev midi. So first of all, we're going to see, remember, where did we learn out kesef from? We learned out kesef, the ability to be mikadesh with money, from where? From kicha mistei Ephron. We'll say, you should know, we had the incredible privilege. We learned this Gemara in Marasa Machpelah. It's absolutely amazing. So remember, we learn out kicha from stay Ephron. That was the first day. It wasn't so pashat. Now everybody was up. But I learned the sugya in Marsach. I think some other people joined. So says the Gemara, so listen to this. So we learn from Kicha Mistei Ephron, we learn that when you're Mekadesh a woman with money, the money has to be given. It has to be an item that's transferred. Rashi says over here, this is actually quite amazing. The way halacha views a loan is the following. If I lend Ruben $1,000, just a regular loan case, there's a concept of milva lo tzanit, which means the moment I give Ruben $1,000, I lend him the money, that money is his. That money is his. It's not viewed in halacha as if $1,000 of mine is in his possession. That money is his. When the due date comes, he's obligated to repay me money. But you hear that distinction? See, you could view a loan as, I have $1,000 that's in the possession of Reuven. Halacha doesn't say that. Halacha says, I gave Reuven $1,000, and again, at some future date, which is the date of repayment, he owes me that money. But right now, none of my money is in his possession. He owns the money that I gave him. Therefore, the Gemara suggests the following. If a man goes ahead and lends money to a woman, and he says, become mikudeshes to me with the money I gave you, that doesn't work. Why? It doesn't work because that money is already owned by her. In order for Kiddushin to be effective, a man has to give a woman an item of consideration, an item of value. Forgiving a loan is not considered to be conveyance of an item of value. Why? Because she already owns that $1,000. Therefore, she's not Mikudeshes. However, listen to this. Bahanos milveh. However, again, if he's Mekadesh with the benefit of the loan, Mikudeshes, then it works. However, Va'asr la'asos came imneha aramas ribis. But you can't do it. Why? Because it looks like interest. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? Hi hana'as milva hechi dami. What is the case of the benefit? What does it mean, hana'as milva, the benefit of the loan? Ilema da'askafa da'amarla arba b'chamisha haribis ma'al yasu. Sifyon HaSirabot said that what? That originally he had said, I'm going to lend you four silver pieces, you pay me back 5, and I'll forgive the 5th. Havosai said, that's ribis, that's interest. That's real interest. So again, of course that's not going to work. Va'od, hainu milveh. So, and furthermore, again, that's the actual case of the loan, to which the Gemara says, Lo tzricha de'arvach le zimna. Oh, we'll say, what's the case? The case over here is lemaisa, again, where what? He extends the duration of the loan. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Lo tzricha de'arvach le zman, hal va'asa va'amar his kachi bahana zu, sha'at hayisno senes pruta la'adam shirfai sin yakach, so let's listen to this. What's the case? The case over here is where he says to her, I'm going to extend the loan. The loan was due on Purim. I'm going to extend it on Pesach. I will say, now there is a value associated with loan extensions. So what we literally say is, he says to the woman, you would have paid my friend to try to go ahead and appease me. What's the value? Meaning there's a value ultimately again of extending the loan. That value of extending the loan, that's the amount ultimately again that I'm going to be mekadesh you with. So I'll say, so remember, that's a new value. That's a new value. So that value again is something that has value to you. I'm giving you that right to extend the loan, and I'm being mekadesh you with that particular value. I'm sorry? Because again, there's no I'm not building onto the principle. You don't have to pay me back anymore. I'm not asking you for any more money. You're not paying me anymore. There's a value. You're asking me for a new term on the loan. So therefore, again, there's a new term on the loan. You would have asked Reuven. The way Rashi sets this up is if let's say I lent Rachel money and she wanted to extend the loan, what she would have done is she would have gone over to my friend Shimon and she would have said, Shimon, go ahead and tell Silber that I'm having some difficult times. Ask him if he doesn't mind extending the loan. So that value that you would have paid Shimon to go ahead and come to me, that's the Mikadosh. It's not ribis because that's not building on anything to the actual principle of the loan. That's an additional privilege that I want in the loan. So that value ultimately again could affect Kiddushin. So let's just do another line. Says the Gemara, Amarava, Heilach mana al menashe tachzir euli. Was an interesting case. So let's say again, Rava says, let's say a man says to a woman, take this money. Actually, I shouldn't say a man says. A person says, take this money on the condition that you return the money to me. So I'll say what this sounds like is a matana al manas lahachzir, a gift on the condition to return it. So b'mercha lo kana. So we'll say again, this doesn't work with transactions. So for example, again, if I want to buy land, if I want to buy land from Reuven, I say, Reuven, I'm going to give you this $1,000 to buy the land on the condition that you give the money back to me. It doesn't work to affect real estate transactions. Be'isha ein mekudeshes, it won't work for Kiddushin. But if a man says to a woman, Hari'at mekudeshes li, right? Be'tabaz zu amanasha tachzireu li. I'm giving you this, right? This is your Kiddushin ring, but give it back to me. It doesn't work. Be'pidyon ben, or a man wants to uphold his son, he gives the Kohen the 5 silver pieces, says to the Kohen, this is yours, on the condition you give it back to me. It does not work. However, be'truma yatsa. But interestingly enough, I will say with truma, it does work. We're going to see what this means. With truma, it does work. But I will say, but you can't do it. Why? Because it has the appearance of a Kohen who's helping out on the threshing floor. And I will say, the concept of the Kohen helping out on the threshing floor is the idea that Chazal did not want a coin. Look at Rashi. V'asr lasos came lefisha b'schar ze yitin lo shart k'tshum actually not it's later on. So coin we see b'beis hagranos is a case where we don't like the coin helping out on the threshing floor and then collecting his truma. Why? Because it looks like, again, he has some type of arrangement with the balabos to go in and get his truma, and that's not appropriate. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Mir Hashem tomorrow with the Mai Kasavar. And again, remember, we're going to try to figure out, we understand why, again, ultimately, at the end of the day, if you went ahead and you gave the money, Amanas Lahachshir, to give it back in all these cases, it makes sense why it doesn't work. We'll discuss tomorrow why it doesn't work in those cases, but why it will work in truma. Shkoyach.